Morning of my mother's 65th birthday, I ironed my blouse twice. I don't know why I'm telling you that detail first, except that it feels important somehow. The way I stood in my apartment at 7 in the morning, pressing the same white cotton collar over and over, trying to make myself look like someone who belonged at that party. Someone they'd be glad to see walk through the door. I should have known better. I was 31 years old and I still hadn't learned. My name is Iris. I'm the middle daughter in a family of 3 girls, and for as long as I can remember, the middle has felt less like a position and more like a weather condition, something that happens between the interesting parts, something you wait out. My older sister Blythe is the one who got the scholarships, the law degree, the husband with a good family name. My younger sister June is the one who got the softness, the round cheeks my mother still pinched at 30. The laugh that made strangers want to pull out a chair for her. I got the average grades, and the job nobody fully understood, and the apartment that was technically mine, but never felt like I'd truly chosen it. I'm an architectural renderer. I make the drawings that show people what a building will look like before it exists. I spend my days creating the image of something that hasn't happened yet. I realize now there's something almost too obvious about that. The party was at my parents' house in Naperville, the one I grew up in, with the crabapple tree in the side yard and the flagstone path that had been heaving out of the ground for 15 years, because my father kept saying he'd fix it himself. I drove the 40 minutes from Chicago alone, windows down even though it was November and the air had that particular bite to it that makes your ears ache. I told myself I liked the cold. I told myself I liked the cold. I told myself a lot of things on that drive. When I pulled into the driveway, I could already hear voices from the backyard. The caterers my mother had hired were moving around the rental tables. There were string lights above the patio, and someone had put together flower arrangements that looked expensive and a little formal for a birthday party. My mother liked things to look like they cost something. My father was the first one to see me come around the corner. He lifted his chin the way he does, not quite a wave. Not quite a nod. Something in between that could mean either hello, or that he'd simply registered my presence the way you register a piece of furniture that's always been in the same spot. There she is, he said, and then turned back to his conversation. Blythe was already holding court near the drink table, one hand wrapped around a glass of white wine, the other gesturing through some story that had the small cluster of relatives around her laughing at just the right moments. She had always known how to do that. She looked beautiful and intentional, every part of her outfit selected to say something about who she was without being obvious about it. I smoothed the front of my ironed blouse and felt the gap between us like a pressure change. June saw me and waved from across the yard with her whole arm, the way she waves at everything, as if the world is always a little further away than expected, and she needs to make sure it sees her. I made my way toward her. Past an aunt I recognized but couldn't name, past a cousin who looked up from his phone long enough to say, "Hey," and look back down. "You look cute," June said when I reached her, and she meant it kindly. I know she did. But there was something in the way she said it. Cute, not beautiful, not stunning, that felt like a gentle ceilinged compliment, one that told you exactly how high you were allowed to go. My mother arrived fashionably late to her own backyard, wearing a dress I'd seen her eyeing online 2 months earlier. She looked genuinely happy, which was good. I wanted that for her. I crossed the patio and kissed her cheek and said happy birthday, and she squeezed my arm and said, "Oh, you made it." Present tense, vaguely surprised, as if my attendance had been in question. The afternoon went the way those afternoons go. I refilled my drink more than I needed to. I talked to an uncle about his knee surgery. I listened to a long conversation about Blythe's law firm's expansion into corporate litigation and nodded at the parts where nodding seemed right. Someone took a group photo near the flower wall my mother had rented, and I stepped into the frame and smiled, and when I saw the photo later on my mother's Facebook, I was not in it. My cousin had shifted left at the last second, and I had been eclipsed by his shoulder and the edge of the floral backdrop. I don't know if anyone noticed. I noticed. There was a moment, maybe an hour into the party, when the conversation at the main table turned to accomplishments. These things have a way of happening at family gatherings. Someone mentions a promotion, someone else counters with a house purchase, and suddenly the table is going around the circuit of who is doing what with their life. My mother's friends were there, women she'd known since the neighborhood was young. They asked about each of us the way you ask about pieces of property, with polite interest and an ear for value. "Blythe's firm just made partner track," my mother said, and there was a particular note in her voice, warm and proud and a little triumphal, the way she sounds when she's just won at something. "And June?" one of the women asked. "June's teaching at the elementary school now. She's just wonderful with children," my mother said. June, who was sitting next to her, got a squeeze on the shoulder. There was a pause. I watched my mother's eyes move briefly across the table toward me and then away again, the way you glance at a window when the light isn't interesting. "And Iris?" the same woman prompted. My mother smiled the smile she keeps for questions she finds complicated. "Iris does something with computers. Architecture adjacent. Architecture adjacent. I had spent 7 years developing a specialty in photorealistic building visualization. I had worked on a mixed-use development in Milwaukee that had been featured in 2 trade publications. I was currently the lead renderer on a cultural center project in Chicago's Pilsen neighborhood that had taken 3 years to get off the ground. But at that table, in that backyard, I was architecture adjacent." I smiled. I said something polite. I excused myself to get more water I didn't need. I was standing in the kitchen holding a glass under the faucet when Blythe came in. She moved around me to get to the cabinet, and I shifted to give her space, and, for a moment, we were just 2 sisters in a kitchen the way we had always been, and I thought maybe this would just be a moment, unremarkable. "You know," she said, reaching past me, "you should really think about going back to school. Get an actual degree people recognize. It would change things for you." I looked at her. "I have a degree." "You know what I mean," she said it gently. That was always the thing with Blythe. She said the hard things gently, as if the softness of delivery changed the shape of what was being said. Something with a clearer path. Something with a title. I turned off the faucet. "I have a title. I'm a senior architectural renderer." She tilted her head in that particular way she has, like she's considering something very small. "I just think you could do more, that's all." I said nothing. She went back outside with her wine. That night, driving home, I thought about what she'd said, not with anger. I was past the stage of immediate anger with my family, had burned through most of it in my late 20s and come out the other side into something quieter and more settled. I thought about it the way you think about a bruise you've had long enough to map. The project I was working on, the Pilsen Cultural Center, had been moving toward an important milestone. We were 6 weeks out from the groundbreaking ceremony, a public event with a press presence and a city council representative, and a ribbon the project director was very particular about the color of. I was the lead renderer on the project team, and my visualizations were the ones that had been used in every public presentation, every community meeting, every funding proposal for 3 years. My mother didn't know that. I'd mentioned the project in the spring, and she'd nodded the way she nods when I talk about work, present but processing something else, the way you half listen to background music. The invitation to the groundbreaking went out in January, 8 weeks after the birthday party. It was a Saturday morning in late February, gray and cold the way Chicago gets in that particular stretch of the year when spring feels genuinely hypothetical. The ceremony was held at the construction site on South Halsted, with a temporary platform and a sound system in a small tent for the officials. My project director, a woman named Constance who communicates entirely in calm sentences and whom I deeply respect, had sent a personal note with the team's invitations. She wrote that the visualization work had been central to the project's story and that she hoped I would stand near the front for the ribbon cutting. I didn't tell my family I was involved. I thought about it, and then I thought about the kitchen and about my mother's face at the table and about architecture adjacent, and I said nothing. What I didn't know was that Blythe had somehow heard about the event. Her firm did some peripheral work in commercial real estate, and apparently one of her colleagues had mentioned it. A cultural center in Pilsen. Big deal, city money, notable project. She had mentioned it to my mother as something worth attending, one of those civic events where you network while appearing culturally engaged. I was standing with Constance and 2 other people from our team when I saw them. My mother, my father Blythe, and June, standing near the tent with coffee cups from the truck parked nearby. My mother was wearing the kind of coat she wears to things she considers important. She was laughing at something Blythe said. She did not see me at first. I watched them for a moment, my family, gathered at the groundbreaking for the project I had spent 3 years building, the project where my name was in the program, where my visualizations were on the display boards positioned around the site perimeter, where Constance had just told a city official standing 5 feet away that our renderer had created some of the most compelling design communication she'd seen in 20 years of project management. I turned back to my conversation. Constance was saying something about the board placement and I responded and we discussed the installation timeline, and I was present in the conversation. Genuinely present, the way I almost never am at family events. It was during the remarks, when the project director from the developers team was speaking, that he mentioned the visualization work specifically. He said that getting community buy-in had depended on helping people see something that didn't exist yet, and that the render team led by Iris Vance had made that possible in a way that changed how the community engaged with the proposal. He said my name into a microphone connected to a speaker, pointed partly toward the tent where my family was standing. I didn't look at them. I kept my eyes on the platform. Constance leaned toward me slightly and said, "That's your moment," and I nodded. When the ribbon was cut and the small crowd applauded, I finally looked toward the tent. My mother was already looking at me. I don't know for how long. She had the expression she gets when she's recalibrating, a slight stillness, like a screen loading. Blythe was looking at the display boards with the visualizations, at my name and the small text below the images. June caught my eye and smiled, and her smile was surprised in a way that should have made me feel something sharp, but only made me feel something sharp, but only made me feel tired. My father crossed the site toward me. I watched him navigate the gravel and the cords on the ground, hands in his coat pockets, and I didn't move toward him. "I didn't know you were part of this," he said. "It's been 3 years," I said. "I mentioned it in the spring." He nodded slowly. "Well," he looked around at the site, at the display boards, at the crowd. "It's a big deal." "Yes," I said, "it is. There's a particular kind of moment that has no drama in it, no confrontation, no tearful acknowledgement, no scene." My family didn't apologize at the groundbreaking. They didn't suddenly become different people. My mother hugged me before they left and said, "We had no idea, Iris." And I said, "I know," and meant it in a different way than she did. What happened afterward happened slowly, the way most real things do. Constance's project report was picked up by 2 local architecture publications and 1 regional magazine that covers urban development. My renders were the cover image of one of them, a street-level perspective of the finished building in late afternoon light, the way I'd imagined it would look when it was finally real. My mother's friend sent her the magazine link. My mother texted me a screenshot with a row of heart emojis. I looked at the text for a while. I thought about the birthday party, about architecture adjacent, about the group photo I wasn't in. I thought about all the years I had carried the hope that they would see me differently if I just did something large enough to be visible. And I realized, standing in my apartment with my phone in my hand, that I'd stopped waiting for them to see me somewhere around the 2nd year of that project. That I had built something real while I wasn't looking at them for permission. I texted back, "Thank you." 2 words. Not cold, not warm. Just 2 words that were true. Blythe called me the following week. We talked for almost an hour, which was longer than we'd talked in years. She asked real questions about the project, about the process, about the software I use, about what comes next. I answered them honestly. At the end, she said, "I didn't understand what you did," and I said, "I know," and there was a pause that had more in it than either of us said. I haven't changed my relationship with my family dramatically. I still go to the holidays, I still answer the group texts, but something in me is different, in the specific way that things change when you stop auditioning. I think about that ironed blouse sometimes. The way I pressed it twice, like if I could just get the collar flat enough, smooth enough, perfect enough, they would finally decide I was worth looking at. I don't iron like that anymore. Last October, I was asked to lead the render team on a mixed-use project in Indianapolis, larger scope than anything I'd done before, the kind of project that gets submitted to national awards. I accepted before the end of the call. I told my project manager yes and hung up and stood in my kitchen for a moment in the particular silence of a good thing that has happened. Then I called my mom. Not to ask her if she was proud, not to see if she'd finally see me. I called because she's my mother, and the news was good, and that's what you do when good things happen, even when the relationship is complicated, even when you've spent years being invisible in your own family, even when the moment of finally being seen happened in a parking lot at a groundbreaking on a gray February Saturday and lasted about 4 seconds. She answered on the second ring. She sounded glad to hear from me. I told her about Indianapolis. There was a pause, and then she said, "Iris, that's wonderful," and I believe she meant it, and that will have to be enough, and most days now it is. I used to think the hardest part was being overlooked. I was wrong. The hardest part is what you do with yourself in the years nobody's watching. For a long time, I kept a mental list of every moment I'd been made small. The group photo I wasn't in, the table where my mother said architecture adjacent and moved on, the kitchen where my sister told me, gently, that I should consider getting a real degree. I carried those moments the way you carry a pebble in your shoe, small enough to ignore, persistent enough to change your gait over time. What I understand now, looking back at those 3 years of building the Pilsen project while my family remained largely unaware, is that something was quietly happening inside me that I didn't have language for at the time. I was learning how to work without an audience. I was learning what it felt like to care about something for its own sake, not because it would change how anyone looked at me, but because the work itself was worth doing. That shift doesn't announce itself. It just accumulates, the way good things tend to. There's a version of this story where I planned it, where I deliberately kept the project secret so that the groundbreaking would become a reckoning, a moment of theatrical vindication. That would make a cleaner narrative. The truth is messier. I stopped mentioning my work to my family because I was tired of watching it land without weight, and somewhere in that exhaustion, I accidentally discovered what it felt like to exist without their approval as the organizing principle of my days. My sister Blythe said I should get a degree people recognized. What she didn't know, what I barely knew myself at the time, was that I was already doing the work that would eventually get my name on a display board at a city-funded ceremony, in a neighborhood that had waited years for that building to exist. Recognition doesn't always look the way you imagined it would when you were standing in a kitchen being told you weren't enough. I think about Iris, the woman I was at that birthday party, ironing her blouse twice, hoping to be seen, and I don't feel sorry for her exactly. I feel something more like respect. She kept going, not because she had figured something out, but because the work was in front of her and she was capable of doing it, and that turned out to be enough to move through the years, until the day her name came through a speaker at a groundbreaking and her mother looked up from across a gravel lot with an expression that took 3 decades to earn. The choices we make quietly, without witness, without applause, without even the comfort of knowing they'll matter, those are the ones that build something real. Every hour I spent on those renders, every revision, every late night getting the afternoon light right on a building that didn't exist yet, that was the accumulation. That was what showed up on a February morning and introduced itself to my family without me having to say a word. I don't believe in waiting to be chosen by the people who should have chosen you first. What I believe in now is the slow, unglamorous work of becoming someone you'd actually want to be, independent of who's in the room to validate it. That's not a lesson anyone handed me. It's something I arrived at by accident, in the years I spent building while nobody was watching. And then one day, they were.